everybody, it's Miss Sue at the Art Studio. I'm going to teach you 13 fun watercolor techniques today. You're going to need a big sheet of watercolor paper. I like to use Strathmore, 140 pound. It's a cold pressed paper, so it's got a little bit of a tooth to it, and this is a 12 by 18 size. So here we go. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to paint right onto dry paper. We just call this wet on dry. If you're using cake pan watercolors, it takes a few seconds for that pigment to get moist enough so you can get saturation. If the colors seem really light, then just give it another minute and work that pigment into your brush. You can use any colors you want. Now we're going to do wet into wet, so I'm going to paint a swatch with water. Then I'm just going to choose some colors and I'm going to charge color in. Wet on dry, wet on wet. Now this is a very important technique for any kind of painting medium that you use, whether it's oil, acrylic, or watercolor. We're going to do a little experiment here, and we're going to call this glazing. What glazing is where you're seeing one color on top of another color, or multiple colors, without the colors physically mixing. I painted 3 colors, and we're going to come back to that when it's dry. I'm going to move on to our next little experiment here. I'm just going to paint a swatch with some earthy tones. And then I'm going to use some rubbing alcohol with an eyedropper, and I'm just going to drop a few drops onto the swatch while it's moist. This is really cool for doing underwater scenes or if you want something really organic. Now I'm going back to my little glazing experiment here. Those stripes are dry, so I'm going to do 3 different colors on top, and you can see now color through color. You don't want to reactivate the paint. Now this is masking fluid. This is a lot of fun because if you're going to paint a field of white daisies or even a bouquet of white daisies, or you have some areas of white that you don't want to have to paint around, you can just mask it off. It's kind of a rubbery fluid and it dries kind of sticky, and then you have to take it off when it's completely dry, of course. So I'm just painting a design in here. I use a little bit of soap on the brush so it doesn't permanently damage the brush. Sometimes this masking fluid is tough to rinse out, so I use cheap brushes for this. Okay, we're gonna have to wait for that to dry, so we're gonna move along and come back to that. This is a fun one. I'm just going to paint a swatch with a couple colors here. This is just fun practice for color mixing too, painting all these different swatches. And while it's damp, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of salt. Now, once you sprinkle the salt, you can't paint on it any longer, or you don't want to, or you'll lose the effect. So the little salt granules kind of suck up the water that's around them, and it creates a crystallized kind of texture. Really fun if you're going to paint a snow scene. I'm going to show you how to do scraping. This works really well for if you wanted to do like a feather or even fur or whiskers. So I just painted a shape here, and while it's wet, so you got to move kind of quickly. I might have to add a little more water to this. I just take a fork, or you can take a serrated plastic knife, and you can scrape out some of the water and pigment. And I'm just going to create, I need to add a little bit more water. It dried on me pretty quickly. I'm just creating like a pine bough. This is a fan brush. These are a lot of fun too. I use them for also for fur and for grass. Let's do a little grass here. I'm just gonna put a little bit of paint on the end of the brush. You don't want it too wet. And I'm just gonna kind of flick upward with my wrist. We want to add some dimension here, so I'm going to do a different color on top. Makes beautiful grass. Now this is oil pastel. I'm just drawing a little design here. You could write a secret message to someone. Oil and water, we know what happens. The oil resists the watercolor. Ooh, let's take a toothbrush, wet it a little bit, put some paint on it, and flick. This makes awesome fields of wildflowers, or if you want to create a texture of some sort. Really fun to do. Now I teach watercolor, and I make my kids throw out the white in their cake pans because I want my students to learn that you don't add white to lighten a color. You just add more water and you have less pigment. So I have really saturated color there for that first swatch, and then I'm just washing off the pigment as I go. You can get all the values of a color just by the ratio of water to pigment. I have a little sponge here. Dipped it in some water just to get it moist. You don't want it drippy wet, you just want it moist. And then put some color on it. And again, you can create some fun texture. Let's make a tree. A turquoise tree. Why not? I'm just taking my liner brush now and I'm going to paint some branches and a tree trunk. I'm having a little too much fun with this one. I might need some shadows in there too. Take a darker color. All right, I have one little section left here. I'm going to show you the dry brush technique. Make sure your brush is really, really dry and you can get wonderful texture. I've used this technique before when I was painting an old barn. All right, my masking fluid's dry, so let's go back and paint over the masking fluid. Now we have to wait for that to completely dry. Now you might have a tool that picks up the masking fluid, but I can't find one, so I'm going to use my finger. Just make sure that the paint is completely dry, and you can do it with your finger carefully. I'm just gently rubbing it off to reveal my whites. So there we go. This is a nice little reference poster for you. I hope you had fun with this. Bye.